When the Son of Man cometh, shall he find faith on the earth?
Lord, I believe, help thou mine unbelief.
May our testimonies be as deep and as strong as that of Jacob, who, when confronted by one who sought to destroy his faith, declared, I could not be shaken.
In some ways, maybe the Lord is getting impatient with the pride cycle. Like, can we just move on? Because I really want to get to the one that seems to encapsulate it all, and that's the story of Samson. And with this, we get Judges 13 and 14 and 15 and 16. The story really slows down here, because there's no better example of a potential judge who really could have pulled it off, that succumbs to the pride cycle and leads to his own downfall. That's the story of Samson in a nutshell. That's the story of Judges in a nutshell. So let's meet this child of promise, great potential. 13:1, the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord. Well, there's pride cycle, another round. I told you get dizzy. And the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. And so we're now in the destruction phase. But what comes next if they'll simply humble themselves and turn to the Lord? Well, deliverance through a judge that's raised up. And you only have to wait till verse 2 before we start seeing him come onto the scene. There was a certain man of Zorah of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. Sound like Sarah? Like Rebecca? Like Rachel, like Hannah next week, like Elizabeth in the New Testament. And what do all these women have in common? They're all barren, and they all end up having children. Miracle children. So the way the narrative begins here, the author is setting up the reader for an expectation. Do we have a miracle on the way? You better believe it. Verse 3, the angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman, and said unto her, behold now, thou art barren, and bearest not. It's like, duh, we just learned that in the last verse. Did you really have to remind me? But here's the promise, thou shalt conceive and bear a son. She is promised the ultimate blessing here. Verse 4, now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine nor strong drink, and eat not any unclean thing. For lo, thou shalt conceive and bear a son. And no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. So this miracle child, this child of promise, is being foreordained, set apart from birth itself. He will grow to be the deliverer of Israel. And so whatever you're taking into yourself during pregnancy, I mean, it's amazing to watch. I mean, my wife, through our 5 pregnancies, she was very careful what she ate, because she knew not only was, it's not just I am what I eat, it's my child is what I eat. And so prenatal vitamins and being careful with food and nutrition and so on, because I am literally creating the mortal tabernacle of this spirit child. Well, mom here is going to be very careful. It's actually interesting for my child to be a Nazarite. In a way, I have to be a Nazarite first. I think there's something beautiful there about parenting, that if I hope to raise children of promise, will I keep the promises myself? Will I live in such a way that my children will see in me an example worth following? They'll still have their agency. They'll still make up their mind. And we see that, sadly, in Samson's story. But is there anything I can do to make sure I fill myself with what God would offer me, so I have something to give to my children? Well, she tells her husband about this expectation and about this promised miracle. Because remember, the angel only appeared to the woman. Manoah, the husband, is kind of in the dark about all of this. But now he hears, and in verse 8, Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O my Lord, let the man of God, which thou didst send, come again unto us. So I want to really hear this for myself. But more than just second witness, it's for this. And teach us what we shall do unto the child that shall be born. You see what Manoah's doing there? He's showing incredible wisdom by admitting his lack of wisdom. I don't know how to raise a child of promise. I don't know how to... My wife's about to deliver a deliverer. What do we do after that? Sure, she'll be really careful during pregnancy to be a Nazarite of sorts herself. But once the child comes, will you please teach us what we should do for him? I imagine that's the prayer that every parent offers when they know a child is about to join the family. Don't let me mess this up. Is there a manual that comes attached? Well, yeah, that's the scriptures. At least it was for me. You see, my wife and I were going to have our first child in 2001. And by then, I think I'd started it the year before, where I would read a little bit of each of the standard works every day to complete it all in a year. So January 1st, I would start Genesis 1, Matthew 1, 1 Nephi 1, D&C 1, Moses 1. And read a little bit every day. It was awesome. It really felt like all the standard works were coming together into one great whole. But when January 1st, 2001 rolled around, I realized this year I'm becoming a father. And I have no idea what I'm doing. So God, will you please send the messenger to tell us what we should do for this child? Well, he already sent me the messenger. It's in print right in front of me. And so that year, I bought a new set of scriptures, just a cheap set, triple combo and Bible, and began reading a little bit every day through all the standard works, just looking for fatherhood. I even have a label on the outside of that set of scriptures. It just says fatherhood in big letters. And I went through in 2001 every word of the standard works, trying to understand what the Father would teach this father about fatherhood. It was a gift I intended to give to my daughter and any other children that might follow in her way. I'm grateful for that year of learning. And it's been followed by lots and lots of on-the-job learning too. Okay, I still haven't mastered that. But I am grateful that God is willing to teach us what to do for our children. Next, verse 9, God hearkened to the voice of Manoah, and the angel of God came again unto the woman as she sat in the field. But Manoah, her husband, was not with her. So again, he's kind of off on his own. It's like, how come it always happens to her and not to me? Well, I might tell you something. And are we willing to trust our marriage partner as far as insights that she or he receive about how to raise our children? Ultimately, we need to become one on this and become equally yoked, but are we willing to listen to one another's perspectives? He was, but he really wanted it for himself. She knew it, and so she runs out to get him and says, honey, come here. That guy, the messenger you were praying for, he came back to me, but you can now come. So he does. They ask in verse 12, how shall we order the child, and how shall we do unto him? Same question as before. How do we raise your child, Father in heaven? The angel then repeats all the instructions he'd given to Manoah's wife before. Be very careful how you raise him. Raise him as a Nazarite from day one. The way the angel puts it, 13 and 14, of all that I said unto the woman, let her beware. She may not eat of anything that cometh of the vine, neither let her drink wine or strong drink, nor eat any unclean thing. All that I commanded her, let her observe. Interesting that this is going to, in some ways, inconvenience Manoah as well. Like, wait, she has to live a certain strict diet? Well, I guess I'll be eating certain things and not eating other things myself. Are we willing to inconvenience ourselves to help other people keep their covenants? That's the story of the daughter of Jephthah, right? And so Manoah, make sure she can keep all that is expected of her. That's part of what is expected of you. Are we that supportive in our spouse's role, realizing that's part of our role as well? Verse 17, Manoah said unto the angel of the Lord, what is thy name, that when thy sayings come to pass, we may do thee honor? And the angel of the Lord said unto him, why askest thou thus after my name, seeing it is secret? Now that's an odd exchange. This is a name that is not to be revealed. This is a name that is, this angel, this messenger, is holding sacred and keeping secret. You remember way back in Genesis 32 when Jacob's at Jacob's ladder and he's wrestling the angel and he asks a similar question, what's your name? And the angel says, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? Oh, second time in Scripture that there's some true messenger being asked by a mere mortal, what's your name? And then the messenger doesn't want to give it. I think there's more than meets the eye as far as what is happening here with this child of promise, this miracle boy. So, verse 19, Manoah took a kid with a meat offering and offered it upon a rock unto the Lord. And the angel did wondrously, and Manoah and his wife looked on. Now, I wish I knew what the angel was doing in verse 19. Whatever it was wondrous. We saw when Gideon laid out food, another true messenger had it consumed by fire from the rock. Is there something else going on? But it's something that they see, something they hear, something that they're looking upon and are amazed by it. Whatever it is, this messenger is conveying to them. Finally, verse 24 and 5, the woman bare a son, called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him at times in the camp of Dan, between Zorah and Eshtaol. And then the story really picks up speed. Judges 14, we see Samson begin to go out against the Philistines. They're the enemy of the week this time. Verse 1, Samson went down to Timnath and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now this is the enemy. These are the people you're supposed to be fighting against. That's why do you think the Spirit of the Lord is beginning to move you at times so you can deliver Israel from the Philistine host? Well, that's just this woman of the Philistines. Surely she's not an enemy. At least I hope she's not, because I'm kind of smitten with her. Now, we're going to see this over and over and over with Samson. He's most famous for his strength. We need to spend more time focusing on his weakness. And women were one of his main weaknesses. So he's gone down to Timnath. He sees this woman. Verse 2, he comes back up. He tells his father, his mother, and said, I've seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore get her for me to wife. Well, how's that for a marriage proposal of sorts? If it's supposed to be arranged from father to father, then Dad, she's the one. Go get her for me. Now that, I'm sure that Manoah and his wife raised Samson as well as they possibly could. They had divine direction on the subject, right? They had been told and taught what to do to raise him. And yet somehow he turned into this. I mean, what do you sense from him in verse 2? I get a sense of a great sense of entitlement, someone who's used to making demands and getting his own way, because it's not, Father, please, or would you consider, or what do you think? I mean, I know it's a Philistine and we're Israelites. That's marriage outside the covenant. What do you feel about this? Because mom and dad would be, no, son, we have been trying to raise you as a Nazirite, set apart. You're even living higher than Israelite standards. And basic Israelite standards are to stay within the covenant. Oh, you're the child of promise. You're the miracle boy. You're the deliverer in training. You can't go there. And yet, Samson, no problem going down to the Philistines. So, jaunts his way down to Timnath. Oh, falls in love. Love at first sight, or at least lust at first sight. And that's the one I want. And so, Dad, get her. And I worry about, again, as we come to know Samson for his incredible physical strength, does that speaking of pride cycle, right? Here's the personification of it, and someone that's so mighty, and then that begins to go to his head. And he forgets the kind of life that brought those blessings to him. And it's just me. I mean, look at these muscles. Look at this arm of flesh. I don't need God. Therefore, I don't need to do what God would ask of me. In fact, I don't even need to ask anything of others. I can make demands on them. And they're supposed to do what I say. Okay? So, Dad, do it. Get it. Get her for me to wife. Verse 3, then his father and his mother said unto him, is there never a woman among the daughters of thy brethren, or among all my people, that thou goest to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? Don't you understand what you're asking for, son? There are righteous daughters of Israel all around you. Find a wonderful Danite damsel right here within our own tribe and raise up seed within the covenant. But what does Samson say? He said unto his father, get her for me, for she pleaseth me well. I don't care about marriage outside the covenant. What would the point of your Nazirite vows be then? This ruins the whole thing. You can't go there, son. But, verse 4, this is an interesting passage. His father and his mother knew not that it was of the Lord that he sought an occasion against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel. Now be careful before you read too much into that. It was of the Lord. Well, what was? Samson's desire to marry outside the covenant? I wouldn't say that was of the Lord. But allowing this, I'll put it this way, honoring Samson's agency, is that of the Lord? Well, he's big on honoring agency, right? But what else is he big on? He's big on bringing good even out of our poor judgment. He's that good of a judge. He can even turn something good out of a poor choice that we've made. He can get beauty out of ashes. And this desire on Samson's part, which God did not plant into him, but that's Samson's agency working on himself. He wants that. Well, if I'm going to honor agency, is there a way for me to turn this for Israel's good? Actually, there is. Since we're trying to deliver Israel from the Philistines, let's see if we can deliver Samson from this Philistine woman, even if we have to do it in a difficult way. See how it unfolds. Verse 5, then went Samson down, and his father and his mother, to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid. And he had nothing in his hand, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. So he's off on his own in this moment. He runs into a young lion and tears it apart. He says, rent it like he would have rent a kid. Picture a small goat. And yet this lion that comes out and attacks Samson, he tears it apart with his bare hands. He has no weapon in his hand. How did he do it? The Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. Now, would Samson have even recognized that it was the Spirit of God that did it? That it was the arm of the Lord? Or would he have looked at his bulging biceps and thought, I got this? It wasn't the Spirit of the Lord that came mightily upon me. It was my own adrenaline that began rushing through, and I can handle lions. Now, this is the first time that we become truly amazed by Samson's strength. But like I said, look past his strength at Samson's weakness. Because to me, the most important word in these verses is the word vineyards. Where did the lion attack him? In the vineyards of Timnath. Now, Timnath is a problem because that's Philistine territory. You're not supposed to be in there. That's across enemy lines. But even more than that, what on earth is a Nazirite ever doing in a vineyard? One of the chief components of the Nazirite vow is never to consume anything from the fruit of the vine. No grapes, no wine, no raisins, none of that. So I can't think of a single good reason why Samson would ever be in a vineyard, let alone a Philistine one. And yet, you understand what I'm getting at here? To me, this is so applicable that here's somebody who feels like I can put myself in harm's way because I'm strong enough to get out of it. I can go to the party where alcohol is being served or drugs are being distributed or immorality is rampant because I'm not going to fall to those things. I can try a little and I'm not going to become addicted or fill in the blanks however you need to fill in the blanks. But do we sometimes fall prey to that? I can put myself in harm's way because I'm strong enough to get out of it. Oh, Samson, yes, you're strong enough to control a lion, but are you strong enough to control yourself? We'll see. And see we do. Samson ends up going. He wants to marry this Philistine beauty, and so they do. They celebrate the wedding feast among the Philistines. Here's the deliverer among the people he's supposed to be delivering his own people from. Okay, strange bedfellows here. But while he's there for the wedding feast, he makes up a riddle based on what he had done with the lion. It's strange. I mean, he sees later at the carcass of the lion, and there's this beehive basically there and honeycomb coming in. So he's like, this would be a really cool riddle about strength and lion and sweetness and honey. And I'm just going to throw out strength and sweetness and see what they come up with. This is so rare, so odd. Honey coming out of a lion. They're never going to figure it out. And so I'm going to make a bet on this riddle and tell them, hey, I got a riddle for you. If you can figure it out, I will give you guys great wealth, like 30 changes of garments. But if you can't figure it out, then you lose the bet and you owe me all of that. So what is Samson doing here? He's trying to make a bet he can't lose. That sounds true to his character. I can go into a vineyard and I can't lose. Look at me. I'm going to make a riddle. See, that one was physical strength. This one is now intellectual strength. So now he's like proud of his mind. And I'm going to come up with a riddle that only I know and none of you will ever be able to solve. Some of us fall prey to pride of physical prowess. Others fall prey to intellectual pride. There's so many forms of it. That's why it's the universal sin. And Samson's dealing with both. Well, he makes this bet he doesn't think he can lose. This is a surefire thing. And what's it for? I'm going to get rich from this. I stand to win and to gain by it. Well, as he says, you can do it anytime before the end of the wedding feast. And it's a 7-day feast. By the end, they're starting to get nervous. They got nervous from the very beginning when they hear it. They're like, anybody have any idea what the strength and the sweetness that he's talking about? And nobody can figure it out. So a few days into it, they go to Samson's bride. And they threaten her. This is everybody out for themselves. Samson want to get something for himself. These people of the Philistines want to get something for themselves. So they go to this bride and threaten her. If you don't find out from Samson what this riddle is, then you're going to pay the price. They say in 15, entice thy husband that he may declare unto us the riddle, lest we burn thee and thy father's house with fire. How's that for a threat? Well, highly motivated. And not too loyal to her own husband. If she probably would have told the truth to, he could have defended her and taken on the enemy himself. No, verse 16, Samson's wife wept before him and said, thou dost but hate me and lovest me not. Thou hast put forth a riddle unto the children of my people and hast not told it me. And she wept before him the 7 days while their feast lasted. And it came to pass on the 7th day that he told her, because she lay sore upon him. And she told the riddle to the children of her people. Sound a little like Potiphar's wife with Joseph? It should, as she is just persuading, pleading, begging him day by day, just wearing him down, at least hoping to. Joseph wasn't willing to be worn down. Sadly, Samson was. So he tells her everything. She tells them everything. They come back and guess what, Samson? Out of our genius, we know the answer to your riddle. By the way, looking back to Potiphar's wife is one thing. Looking forward to Delilah is the other. Because what just happened there is going to happen in a more intense echo once we meet Delilah in a few minutes. His response, Samson's that is, once they solve the riddle, he says to them in verse 18, and please forgive, actually don't forgive, be aware of the crass language. He says to these fellow riddlers, if ye had not plowed with my heifer, ye had not found out my riddle. Now that's a horrible way to describe your own bride. If you hadn't plowed with my heifer. When we were talking about the red heifer, by the way, one of you who knows farming better than I do explained to me that a heifer is simply a cow that has not yet had a calf. Oh, okay. So this is a virgin cow. And here's this Philistine woman that, as far as Samson is concerned, oh, that's my heifer. That's my cow that hasn't had a calf yet. Yikes. I don't think I'd ever want to use terms like that for anyone that means something to me. Is this, again, a slight hint to the personality of Samson? I get what I want, which seems to just suggest that what he wants, even if it's a person, is just an object that he can lay claim to. I get a sense, I hope I'm not reading too much into it, but I do get a sense there in that comment that here's a man who has objectified his wife, which makes sense if he just like Caesar once down in Timnath and says, that's the one for me. Why? Because of who she is or what she'll do for you or how it'll make you look or feel. It seems, again, like objectification. But the Lord can get something out of it. Verse 19, the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. Here's God trying to make something positive out of something negative. And Samson went down to Ashkelon, Philistine territory, and slew 30 men of them, and took their spoil, and gave change of garments unto them which expounded the riddle. And his anger was kindled, and he went up to his father's house. But Samson's wife was given to his companion, whom he had used as his friend. Some translations say that was Samson's best man at the wedding. Now that's interesting because in some ways, wow, Samson didn't end up marrying outside the covenant after all. At least there doesn't seem to be any result of that. And so, did God not only get something good out of it, as far as we're trying to expel Philistines, we're trying to take the war to them, and this is my mighty deliverer. Because this is the first time we really see him attacking Philistines. And what motivated him to do it? Not loyalty to the God of Israel. Not even, I'm trying to free my people. He was too self-centered and self-serving for that. But now that I lost the bet that I thought was surefire, I don't have 30 changes of clothing to give. I was going to get it. I was trying to enrich myself. Well, I'm certainly not going to impoverish myself. So what am I going to do? I'm going to find 30 rich Philistines, kill them, take all their stuff, and then pay off my debt. That's horrible. And we see a lot of horribleness in Samson. But it's as if God is trying to get him moving in the direction of his mission to fight Philistines and free the people from them. And in the meantime, you came back, and I guess there's no loyalty on the Philistine side, and his soon-to-be supposed father-in-law pulled a switcheroo here, and now Samson has no Philistine wife. Oh, well, I'm trying to save you from yourself, okay? I'm trying to jumpstart your mission and keep you from falling prey to your own weaknesses. Chapter 15 then follows. Samson tries to get his wife back, but is denied. He's so angry in reaction that he takes it out on the Philistines. In verse 4, Samson went and caught 300 foxes. Now, can you imagine this? Picture this one unfolding. Somebody strong enough, again, arm of flesh, that he can somehow gather 300 foxes that he's captured. But then notice what he does with them. He took firebrands and turned tail to tail, and put a firebrand in the midst between two tails. And when he had set the brands on fire, he let them go into the standing corn of the Philistines, and burnt up both the shocks and also the standing corn with the vineyards and olives. Now picture what's happening here. Picture this hulking, Goliath of a man, Samson, and he's got 300 foxes now under his control, and he picks one up by a tail and picks up the other by a tail. These are living foxes. And they're hanging from their tails. Picture them like snapping and biting and scratching and just trying to get away. And this mighty man just is trying to hold them tight enough to tie their tails together. It's going to hurt these foxes. But he ties the tails together and sticks a torch right in the knot. And then he does this 150 times. Okay? He's made 150 little ticking time bombs out of living flesh, living fox. And then he lights the fuse and throws these 150 into the Philistine grain fields. Now imagine if you have a lighted torch, a fire tied to your tail. I'm going to run away from that as much as I can. Unfortunately, I'm also tied to another fox that's feeling the same pressure. And so that's why I call this a ticking time bomb, that these things are going to run wildly. I can't imagine, as far as military technology is concerned, forget a chariot. How about a fox bomb? Okay, a fire fox. Maybe this is where you get it. And here they are running away from each other, but wreaking havoc everywhere they go. And no wonder the fields of the Philistines go up in flame. By the way, we saw this right in the aftermath of an ill-chosen marriage. I do think this is a pretty powerful metaphor for a bad marriage, where there's two people that are tied together, but are trying as hard as they can to get away from each other, because they have things in the marriage or things attached to themselves that are causing major friction and even fire. And in my zeal to get away from my own problems, my lesser self, or to get away from a person with problems of their own, we end up wreaking havoc and burning to the ground our own family. I see it happening because it's not just one couple anymore. It's 150 pairs of foxes. It's an innumerable number of broken homes that are igniting our own society and leaving it in ashes. I think we need to be careful about the fires we light, and careful about the people we tie ourselves to. Samson was not careful. I pray that we can be. Well, whatever lessons we learned from this, the Philistines weren't out to learn lessons. They were livid. Now their temperature rises. They're the ones on fire now, and they're so angry about what... You see this is going back and forth, tit for tat, and it's like, well, you did this, and now I'm going to do this, and now you're going to do this, and pretty soon we even lose track of who started it. That doesn't matter. Neither one is ending it. So the Philistines, ready to avenge the destruction of their own fields, they go, and speaking of burning, they burn Samson's wife or bride and her father, and seems like his whole family. You destroy everything that matters to us temporally. Well, we're going to destroy everything that mattered to you emotionally. And so now they are martyrs to the mistakes of Samson and their own people. So then what does he do? Well, you avenged that. I'm now going to avenge that. And again, we escalate back and forth. He avenges their death with what's called a great slaughter. That's in verse 8. And then the Philistines come back to avenge that by going up to battle against the people of Judah. Verse 10, the men of Judah said, "Why are ye come up against us?" And they answered, "To bind Samson are we come up, to do to him as he hath done to us." But then when the men of Judah ask Samson what he's thinking, bringing all this danger upon them, his response in verse 11, "As they did unto me, so have I done unto them." You see this escalating cycle of revenge? Well, they hit me. Well, because they hit me. And well, he burned this. Well, they burned that. And back and forth, we're only going to do to him what he did to us. Well, Samson, what are you up to? Well, I'm only doing to them what they did to me. We saw a pride cycle. Here's a pride cycle. Here's a vengeance cycle. Well, the men of Judah are like, we don't want to have anything to do with this. This is between you and them. So please leave us out of it. And since you're here, like with us, and they're going to take out their frustration on us, will you please this is interesting, because it's like, you're too strong for us too. Will you let us tie you up and deliver you over? This is like the Philistines want extradition, and they're going to come and destroy us if we don't hand you back over to them. So will you please let us do it? And Samson's like, well, as long as you promise not to fight me alongside them. So like I can handle the Philistines by myself. I don't want to have Philistines on one side and Judahites on the other. So yeah, go ahead, tie me up. Again, does this sound like what we're learning about Samson? Oh, vineyards of Timnath. Okay, I got in trouble. A lion jumped out to get me. Big deal. I got out of it. Okay, now I've got myself into trouble with these Philistines, and now the Judahites are mad at me, and they're going to tie me up. But, well, I can always get out of my problems. And so, sure, do it. And so they bind him, and they deliver him over to the Philistines. But then the story really gets intense. Verse 14, when he came unto Lehi, there's a name that Latter-day Saints like from the Book of Mormon, but this is a town. When they came to Lehi, the Philistines shouted against him. It's like, yes, we finally have him right where we want him. He's bound right before us. But the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him. That keeps happening. He probably didn't realize it was God, thought it was him. But the cords that were upon his arms became as flax that was burnt with fire, and his bands loosed from off his hands. He found a new jawbone of an ass, and put forth his hand, and took it, and slew 1,000 men therewith. once again, I'm okay being in harm's way because I'm always strong enough to get out of it. And so it was, there in the land of Lehi. Now, Lehi in Hebrew means jaw. And so there's a play on words here. And whether it was Lehi first and then he finds the jawbone, or whether he takes the jawbone and they rename the city afterwards, hard to tell. But he takes this jawbone and he wields that as his weapon. I mean, he could take on a single lion with his bare hands, but 1,000 Philistines? I might need something. So I'll just find anything. And he takes this thing and starts smashing his way through the enemy army after having already broken out of the bands that he was in. By the way, how were those bands described? They became as flax burnt with fire. Oh, flax is something so thin. Imagine it, I mean, this is a spider web that he's being wrapped up in. That's how it felt to him once the Spirit of God came upon him. Again, probably mistaken in his mind for his own physical strength. Do you remember the verse in 2 Nephi 26 that talks about Satan leading people away? It says that he leadeth them by the neck with a flaxen cord until he bindeth them with his strong cords forever. I think there's an interesting irony there, that Satan starts with something so small and simple, something so easy to break out of, but just keep winding it and weaving it around you. And pretty soon that flaxen cord becomes a strong one. Samson, that's exactly what's happening to you. We're watching it unfold. It was just flax and you broke out easy, but the Philistines are still weaving away. By the end of chapter 15, in verse 18, Samson was sore athirst. He called on the Lord. This seems to be the first time he's tapping into that Nazirite vow and trying to address his God directly. But what does he say? He said, "Thou hast given this great deliverance into the hand of thy servant." Oh, so far so good. He recognizes that was your strength, not mine. Who am I? I'm just thy servant. Maybe this is the turning point for Samson. Well, don't get ahead of yourself. Samson's prayer took a turn here and says, "Now shall I die for thirst and fall into the hand of the uncircumcised?" Darn it. Now you're just, come on, God, come through for me. Give me some water here. So God clave an hollow place that was in the jaw, and there came water thereout. And when he had drunk, his spirit came again, and he revived. Wherefore he called the name thereof En Hakore, which means the spring of him who calls, which is in Lehi unto this day. Now, take that literally, the way the King James translators gave it to us, and that sounds really, really weird. He's tired, he's exhausted, he's just killed 1,000 men with this jawbone of a donkey. And as he's thirsty and prays to God for some deliverance, God says, Moses hit the rock, I'll just kind of pop the cork on this jawbone. And right out of the jaw, out of this hollow spot, water will spew forth. Well, as a God of miracles, I'm fine with him doing it that way. But a better translation, and probably a more accurate one, Lehi means jaw. And so it's not that in this hollow place in the jawbone, but rather there was a little hollow, a little sunken area in Lehi, in jawbone, in this town. And in this little hollow, a spring burst forth. That sounds a little more normal, doesn't it? And what does Samson call it? He calls it En Hakore, the spring of him who called. That doesn't seem to be just like a water faucet coming out of a jawbone, but a spring coming out of the ground of Lehi. By the way, there are some fascinating archaeological things like Stela 5 from Mexico that have a jawbone and tree of life imagery and Lehi. There's some fascinating scholarly articles out there that seem to draw that connection with Lehi and a jawbone in Mesoamerica and so on. But what I'm saying here is, Samson, you're getting closer, but at the same time you're getting further away. You're still feeling entitled, that you can make demands of your parents and now make demands of God. And yes, credit him for part of it, but then come on, come through. You came through for me there. Why aren't you coming through for me here? I do like the fact he names it, though, the spring of him who calls. I did call upon God, and living water came bubbling forth to help me. And I do know of that kind of deliverance when truth or insight or help or grace has come bubbling up whenever I've called upon God to. I just hope that Samson is recognizing this dependence on the Lord and becoming humble as a result. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to be the case once you turn to chapter 16. Here's the famous story of Samson and Delilah. We saw a Philistine woman before, and now here's another one, and we've got some problems here. We actually meet another one in between. Okay, verse 1 and 2, then went Samson to Gaza, yet another Philistine city, and saw there an harlot, and went in unto her. Oh, come on, Samson. At least the first one, you were going to get married. This time, it's just a prostitute, and you're going to go straight in. It was told the Gazites, saying, Samson is come hither. And they compassed him in, and laid wait for him all night at the gate of the city, and were quiet all night, saying, in the morning, when it is day, we shall kill him. Now, another time that Samson is putting himself in harm's way. A vineyard among the Philistines, bound up and delivered to the Philistines, now going to an harlot in a Philistine city, with the army then surrounding him. We've got him right where we want him. But Samson can easily shrug and go, yeah, you got me right where you want me. I can get out of any jam, any bind. Watch this. I'm so used to getting out of negative consequences for dumb decisions that I no longer worry about dumb decisions. They're getting dumber and dumber as we speak. So, verse 3, Samson lay till midnight, arose at midnight, and took the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts, and went away with them, bar and all, and put them upon his shoulders, and carried them up to the top of a hill that is before Hebron. From Gaza to Hebron is like almost 40 miles. So imagine, I'm trapped. I'm trapped behind the walls of the city and the big city gates and the army outside. Look how scared I am. And Samson rips off the city gate with the posts that were holding it, as heavy and massive as those would be, but just hoists them on his shoulder and walks, a marathon and a half to get back to Israelite territory. Oh, I'm impressed, again, with your physical strength, Samson. But I am underimpressed with your spiritual lack thereof. You keep putting yourself into sticky situations. Verse 4, here's another one, the big one. Finally, one that's bigger than he is. It came to pass afterwards that he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. Same long-standing weakness. This one's finally going to lead to his ultimate demise. Verse 5, the lords of the Philistines came up unto her, and said unto her, entice him. See wherein his great strength lieth, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to afflict him. And we will give thee every one of us 1,100 pieces of silver. Sound a lot like that first bride? We'll give you something. Here's a bribe. Then it was a threat. Either way, entice him. Find out the riddle. Here, find out the source of his strength. It's amazing that Satan is always trying to find the chink in our armor. And everyone has different chinks. But what is your weakness? I hope you know it, because I think Satan probably does. Sure enough, Delilah begins asking Samson for his secret. And he makes up a lie. Maybe he learned a little from his last lesson. I shouldn't have told that one Philistine girl. What was her name again? I don't know. She's gone. I shouldn't have told her about the honey and the lion, because, it came back to bite me. So I got another one that keeps whining and wailing, like, please tell me. And just to get her off my case, fine. He makes up a lie about, this is what would really bring me down. I mean, this is my Achilles heel. Now, he lies about it, but then somehow, ironically, the next morning, he wakes up to find himself in the exact situation he had described to Delilah the night before. Now, you'd think, is this where the dumb jock stereotype comes from? I don't know. But you'd think Samson would have the intelligence to go, wait a minute, I told her what my weakness was, and I woke up within that exact weakness? I don't know if I should trust this woman anymore. No big deal. I can trust myself and trust my strength. And so when I wake up in the morning in that exact circumstance, and I forgot to tell you, the room is surrounded by Philistine soldiers ready to pounce upon me. And Delilah says, "Oh, Samson, the Philistines are here." He gets up and he immediately breaks out of those flaxen cords like it's a piece of cake and defeats the Philistines, and everything's fine again. This happens 3 different times. It's not getting through Samson's thick skull. The first time it was, well, if you tie me up with 7 green withes, like branches or vines, or it might even be sinews of animals, things that are fresh and strong that way, not brittle. Oh man, I just can't break out of those things. And the next morning, I'm in those things, but watch me break out. Second round was, sorry, I tricked you. It's really new ropes. If you buy me with new ropes, then man, it's something about the newness of it all. Old ones, they kind of fall apart. New, just can't do it. And next morning, I'm in new ropes. And he breaks out easy. Third time, he says, well, if you weave my hair into a loom. Oh, we're getting closer now. Something about my hair. She's whittling away at him, just kind of working him down. And now the Nazirite vow does have something to do with his hair. He doesn't tell her the whole truth, but tells her a half-truth. If you weave my hair into a loom, then I have no strength. And sure enough, he wakes up in the morning and, that's the weirdest thing. My hair has been woven into this tapestry. It's tied in with this loom. In fact, it says that she used a pin to fasten his hair into the loom. And the word for pin there is the same word as nail for Jael, which again, nail for tent spikes and tabernacle pegs and nail in a sure place. With Jael, it's such beautiful symbolism. Here, it's the reverse. And so sad that what a woman like Jael is using to defeat the enemy, now the enemy is using to try to defeat Samson. Just interesting role reversals here. Well, he breaks out of that one too. I mean, his hair was still there. It was just woven in. And he just gets up and kind of shakes the loom loose and defeats the Philistines. And this time, Delilah is just devastated. And she says to him in verse 15, how canst thou say, I love thee, when thine heart is not with me? Can you just hear the hypocrisy just dripping off her tongue? Love? Well, where's yours? Your heart's not with me? Well, yeah, his never was. It was just lust. But yours isn't with him. Yours is self-serving as well. She goes on, thou hast mocked me these 3 times, and hast not told me wherein thy great strength lieth. And it came to pass, when she pressed him daily with her words, and urged him, so that his soul was vexed unto death. Again, that sounds exactly like Potiphar's wife. Hadn't learned his lesson from his first Philistine wife. Then, verse 17, he told her all his heart, and said unto her, there hath not come a razor upon mine head, for I have been a Nazirite unto God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will go from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Those are, I think, my favorite words from Samson, because he finally admits something that might be even more than he realizes himself. What is it that makes you different, Samson? Not your hulking frame, not your incredible physical strength. It's the covenant that your parents raised you to keep. And even though you seem to be breaking parts of that covenant left and right, a vineyard here and a harlot there, and another Nazirite vow is not to be around dead people. Samson, you're always around dead people, and they're dead because of you. What are we doing here? Well, on this one, though, at least he never cut his hair. At least there was the outward visibility of someone that's trying to live a different life, even though he wasn't living it very differently. But the way he said it there, it's that makes me different. Without that, then I'm weak, and then I'm like any other man. Our strength comes from our spirituality. It comes from our connection to God. Our power, our difference comes in our connection to Christ, and that is a covenant connection. Without it, it's amazing to watch the arm of flesh shrivel before your eyes, because it was never your strength to begin with. It was always God's. Israel, are you learning that through your rounds of the pride cycle? Samson, are you learning that through yours? Well, you're about to. Because sure enough, the next morning, like clockwork, like it's been done already 3 times, he wakes up with his hair shaved off. Again, surrounded by the soldiers. How could you not see this coming, Samson? And in verse 20, he awoke out of his sleep and said, I will go out, notice this phrase, as at other times before, and shake myself. And he wist not that the Lord was departed from him. You see that his prior experiences had lulled him into a false sense of security. Remember, it was Jael with her lullaby. Here's some more milk, Sisera. Here's a mantle, a cover. Let me sing you to sleep. And then I'll take you down with this nail. Reverse the roles. And now it's Delilah lulling Samson to sleep spiritually. In fact, it's not just Delilah. It's Samson himself that has been lulling himself into this false sense of security. Because I've gotten out of every jam I've put myself in. Lion, army, you name it. I can get out. Until you can't. And even that phrase, he wist not that the Lord was departed, that one is really haunting. He didn't even know the Spirit was gone. Which makes me wonder, did you ever really know when it was with you? I think sometimes we take for granted the presence of the Holy Ghost, or we're so used to it, at least on a lower level, that come or go, we can't even tell. We don't recognize that it's with us, helping us, guiding us, empowering us. How do you think you got through all these things in the past? The Spirit of the God came mightily upon you. No, you just thought it was yourself. And now that it's gone, you still think you still have yourself. And so I'm good. I worry about our inability to recognize the Holy Ghost when it's here or when it's not. And I hope we can grow sufficiently sensitive to the Spirit to be able to tell as it increases or decreases in intensity. For Samson, it was all off. Makes me wonder if Samson really had awakened out of his sleep after all. To me, it seems like he's been spiritually asleep for a long, long time. Then you get to verse 21. The Philistines took him and put out his eyes. First thing they do, remove your ability to see. Loss of vision. Then they brought him down to Gaza and bound him with fetters of brass. And he did grind in the prison house. Then these leaders gather Philistines from all over into the house of their god. The Philistine god is named Dagon. And they bring into this temple of Dagon and pack the place with worshipers, if you want to call it that. Revelers is a better word for it. Because they're going to come and bring out Samson for sport. So they can make fun of him, they can mock him, they can laugh at him. I mean, he's blind. Maybe they're going to use him as a human piñata, and people can start hitting him or beating him or doing whatever they want to him, because he doesn't even know where the blows are coming from. And he's bound down, he's in chains, so there's nothing he can do to really fight back anyway. Now, think about this. Verse 25 adds that last element of the mockery. It says, it came to pass when their hearts were merry, that they said, call for Samson, that he may make us sport. And they called for Samson out of the prison house, and he made them sport, and they set him between the pillars. Again, with no ability to see and no freedom to fight, they had Samson right where they wanted him. They could mock him, reduce him down to the absurd. Were we really afraid of this guy? Look at him. He's nothing. And what did it all come from? A loss of vision, there's the eyes. A loss of agency, there's the chains. A loss of identity, who's this guy? Israelite, deliverer, whatever. And a loss of dignity, that we can mock and make sport of you. It was never a game when we were fighting, but it's a game to us now. Now, I don't know of a better visual aid than Samson for the vision that Enoch had of the earth in its darkened state. I mentioned this back in Moses 7, but here we see it in living color, since we still have eyes to see, hopefully, unlike Samson did. Here's the verse, Moses 7:26. And he, Enoch, beheld Satan, and he had a great chain in his hand, and it veiled the whole face of the earth with darkness. And he looked up and laughed, and his angels rejoiced. Now do you see Samson as the personification of that? Satan had a great chain in his hand. There's Samson in his fetters of brass. He used it to veil the whole face of the earth with darkness. There's Samson with his eyes put out. And then the devil looks and laughs while his angels rejoice. There's the Philistine multitudes packing the temple of their false god, mocking their fallen enemy. The one with the greatest potential to have made a difference in Israel, but one who fell painfully short of all that. What does it boil down to? Satan seeks to bind and blind. It's the nature of sin. It's the nature of addiction. Addiction, more than anything, is the binding side. But to blind us, to get us in there, to try to remove from us the possibility of seeing the light of the Lord. This is exactly what's happening in our day. Enoch's vision, his visions were of the latter days, and it's happening with too many of people in the church with incredible potential to build the kingdom and deliver Israel. Instead, bind, blind, laugh, mock, lost vision, lost agency, lost dignity, lost identity. Do we know who we are? My fellow Samsons. We're children of promise. We're miracle people that God has tried to prepare to make a difference. I pray we can make it. Well, one other detail here before we end the story of Samson. In verse 22, the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. It's just starting to come through, a little stubble there on the scalp. But to me, as we'll see in the aftermath, his strength is beginning to return. Now here we have to take the metaphor and realize that if we are willing to let our covenants begin to grow again, to grow some faith, even if it's still really short, but spiritual strength will come right along with it. We can regain spiritual strength we have lost. We can trust in the atonement of Jesus Christ. That's what it's there for. So even if we find ourselves trapped in prisons of our own making, let your hair grow back. Let your faith regrow, and spiritual strength will come flowing back into you. God has not given up on you yet, Samson. But what happens? He asks the boy who led him from prison out into Dagon's temple, "Put my hands upon the pillars, just so I can rest." Well, it's not quite rest that he had in mind. But as he then feels the pillars between his hands and begins to feel the strength of God begin to course through him once again, what happens? Verse 28, Samson called unto the Lord and said, "O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee." I'm finally remembering you. "Strengthen me, I pray thee, only this once, O God." He could have had that strength all along. "That I may be at once avenged of the Philistines for my 2 eyes. And then he begins pushing upon these pillars. Now again, God is going to get some good out of this in terms of trying to deliver Israel from the Philistines. Because this temple, packed with people, in fact 3,000 more upon its roof, thousands and thousands of Philistines were there. The important ones, the leaders. Samson, you could have been defending Israel against them through your entire life. You had the strength to do it. But here Samson calls upon that strength for one final act. and it's one of self-sacrifice. In verse 30, he said, "Let me die with the Philistines." And he bowed himself with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead which he slew at his death were more than they which he slew in his life. When I read that, I see in Samson so much potential. And like I said, it was his life that God was trying to consecrate. It was his life, not his death. This is such a sad and painful end of a sad and painful story, filled with potential that went unmet because of covenants that went unkept. There's an interesting verse in 3 Nephi 6, in these final years before the destruction of the wicked and the coming of Christ, where it says that there was nothing in all the land to hinder the people from prospering continually, except they should fall into transgression. And I don't know a better verse to describe Samson. The judge with the greatest potential of all. If his spiritual strength had only matched his physical strength, the history of Israel could have been different. The only thing that kept it was that he fell into transgression. And worst of all, kept falling into it because he thought he could keep getting his way out. May we be wiser than Samson, stronger than he. As far as this week's Come Follow Me, that's where it ends. I've added all kinds of other chapters that didn't make the cut as far as the curriculum is concerned. But as we've covered everything, we still have a few more chapters if we really want to cover the end of the book. This will do fairly quickly, but these are hard chapters. They're morbid, they're graphic. Welcome to ancient Israel, especially at a time when people are not turning to God. We're going to see if Samson was our biggest chance to finally emerge from the pride cycle, and then this tragic demise of his own, we're kind of left there. And in the remaining chapters of Judges, we see what life devolves into when you stay on the bottom end, the broken side of the pride cycle. So if you'll bear with me for a few more minutes, chapter 17 through 21 basically tell two sad stories that happen when you bottom out in the pride cycle. Chapter 17 has to do with a man named Micah. He's an Ephraimite. Micah, by the way, is the shortened form of the name Michael. And Michael, means one who is like God. So Micah, you're supposed to be good. Your name would suggest that. You're supposed to be like God. Unfortunately, his likeness to God is not a spiritual similarity. It's a tragic counterfeit. This is the verse that points it out to us. Judges 17:5. The man Micah had an house of gods. These are false gods. These are graven images. He made an ephod. There's the false robes of an apostate priesthood. And teraphim, those are idols, graven images, household gods, and consecrated one of his sons who became his priest. Now remember, Micah was from the tribe of Ephraim. There's no priesthood there. He's not a Levite. So what's Micah doing? In some ways, it's a twisted play on his name. Not one who's truly trying to become like God, but one who's trying to fake his way into appearing that he's like one. I got gods. I got priesthood. I've got holy priesthood robes and garments. I'm good. No, you're not. Sound again like a personification of Israel? Are you falling prey to falsehood? In verse 6, in those days there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. The first phrase comes up, I think, 4 times in the book of Judges. No king, certainly no king of kings at the helm. No, they've banished that monarch. And even lesser leaders, even good judges, are just coming and going as we revolve around the stage. And that second phrase, without a king to tell you what is right, without an eternal sovereign establishing an eternal standard, what are you left with? Everyone does what's right in his own eyes. That's moral relativism. And welcome to the 21st century. We are living in the days of the judges. And no one judges based on true judgment. I shouldn't say no one. We have prophets and apostles. We have wise men and women that are doing their very best to hold to standards that have been set by God and by good people throughout history. I'm just afraid that the pendulum is swinging so far in the direction of non-traditionalism and anti-institutionalism and radical individualism, even to the point of narcissism, that no wonder relativism is what comes as a result. You do you is what we hear these days. And everyone's doing themselves instead of trying to become like God. It's the false Micah, exactly what's happening. They're not becoming like the true God, they're becoming a God unto themselves and doing whatever seems right to them. And how would Micah respond if we accused him of all that? What are you talking about? I'm not doing anything wrong. Who says I can't have my own priest? I mean, Ephraimites are just as good as Levites. In fact, we're the birthright tribe. We probably should have had a priesthood all along. You have no right to tell me what I can or cannot do. Careful here, Micah. What ends up happening then is there's a young Levite, who is from the priesthood tribe. And he's from Bethlehem in Judah. He's traveling through the area. He passes by Micah's house, and Micah is like, whoa, you're actually a real Levite? I wonder if there's something down deep within Micah that realizes, I'm just a total fake. I'm a total fraud. I'm an Ephraimite, and so is my son. And so what's this pseudo-priest? Here's priestcraft. In fact, that gives me an idea. Let's really do some real priestcraft to get a real priest. Perfect. Hey, Levite, what are you doing? You're just passing through? You want to stick around? Because I'll tell you what, I will pay you handsomely if you'll be my little household priest. I had one, but it's kind of a cheap imitation, and you're kind of the real thing. So would you come? And the Levite's like, well, sure, why not? There's no king, there's no set standard, and we can do whatever we want. You want me, I want some money. I don't get paid a whole lot working at the tabernacle, So working for you sounds like a good deal. So this is a win-win. Well, God would say it's a lose-lose. And talk about priestcraft by definition. Your priesthood now becomes your craft. There's your priestcraft. And Micah is just giving kind of a token nod to the Lord's way. At least I have a Levite now. Okay? Good enough? Can we compromise? Well, keep reading. Chapter 18. Now we're going to meet some Danites, and we're still going to deal with priestcraft and some additional idolatry. Verse 1 starts with a phrase that should start standing out to us. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Again, no social standard, no absolute truth. In those days, the tribe of the Danites sought them an inheritance to dwell in, for unto that day all their inheritance had not fallen unto them among the tribes of Israel. So that part's still some of those tasks that have been left undone. You haven't conquered all your territory. And now Danites are kind of out, ready to conquer some more. So a few of the men of Dan go in search of additional land to settle. They end up passing through that same area the Levite had a while before. They swing by the house of Micah. And wait, you got your own Levite? That's so cool. I didn't know you could do that. Can you have him bless us? It's actually starting to sound like Balak and Balaam. Right? Can I hire him to bless me at somebody else's expense? Well, sure, I guess. That's fine. I mean, I wasn't using him tonight. And so the Danites get a blessing from Micah's Levite. And then they march on and end up wanting to take on this. And they find a city thinking, oh, this is a great land of inheritance. Let's take that on. But then they realize, actually, if a blessing from a Levite was good, I'll bet the presence of a Levite would be even better. So instead of just, hiring him, let's really take him on board. And instead of just paying for a blessing, let's go for full-time employment. What do you say? So they approach the Levite and say in verse 19, go with us and be to us a father and a priest. Is it better for thee to be a priest unto the house of one man, says lowly Micah, or that thou be a priest unto a tribe and a family in Israel? I mean, if Priestcraft pays, then we're offering you an incredible raise. Come work for us. And the Levite's like, sweet, I'm getting promoted? Bring it on. Verse 20, the priest's heart was glad. He took the ephod and the teraphim and the graven image and went in the midst of the people. Now, wait a minute. Those didn't belong to you. Those were all Micah's stuff. I mean, yeah, counterfeits all and fakes all, but, well, I'm a fake too. I'm a kind of a counterfeit. Well, but sort of true. I'm a Levite after all. But all these trappings, I have priesthood, priestcraft, close enough. I want the trappings of all of this stuff too. So I'm going to bring all these kind of lucky charms and go with you. Well, they're on the march now to take over this city, and then Micah finds out, I was like, wait, where's my Levite? Wait, where's my ephod, and where's my graven images, and my household gods, and what happened? And so he comes rushing out with his neighbors and friends, and confronts the Danites, and like, what are you doing with my holy counterfeits? And they're like, well, to the victor go the spoils. Might makes right, and we outnumber you. Do you really want to take us on to try to get back your priest? And Micah's all, when you put it that way, I think I'm good. I guess I could probably always make some more stuff and hire a new counterfeit. Maybe my son wants to be priest again. I don't know. And so Micah and his people go away. To me, it's interesting to see these two parties, Micah versus the Danites, neither one of whom has any authority for this. Neither one of whom has any real religion, so to speak. But they want religion with them. They want the seal of approval. At least they want that stamp to rubber stamp whatever it was that they wanted without it. And that's so fascinating. There's actually an interesting book out there called The Myth of Religious Violence. And so often religions are blamed for the violence throughout world history. Now, they're partially to blame, but in this book, The Myth of Religious Violence, the scholar who writes it points out, it's unfair to chalk it up to religious motives at a time throughout most of human history when you didn't separate out political, economic, religious identities. It's just life, and it's how it is. And the second issue is, was religion really the motivating factor? Or were the goals being pursued based on other issues, but then religion was kind of hired to provide some added motivation? I mean, the Nazis weren't very Christian, to put it that way, but they sure wanted to pressure the Christian churches into rubber stamping what they were trying to accomplish. To me, it's interesting, again, in this chapter to see political parties, so to speak, Danites versus Micah, each wanting to enlist the aid of religion, even when it's false. We don't care about that. If you can add some kind of sense of divine authority, then people will do incredible things, believing that God is behind them or with them. And that's what's happening here. But since the Danites outnumbered Micah and his friends, they took religion in hand, marched down to destroy this city, which they do. But the way it's described is really fascinating. I know many of you, and myself as well, wrestle with the violence of Joshua and Judges in terms of the conquest of Canaan. And the massacres of cities and destroying everything, man, women, children, animals, you name it, it's hard. Some have wondered, why couldn't God have just done it in terms of a natural disaster or something? Let the walls come a-tumbling down and destroy everything that way and leave it in his hands, kind of another flood. But to make the Israelites do it themselves, this is horrible. Well, remember, it was capital crimes with capital punishment. Remember, it was God waiting for the iniquity of the Amorites to be full. Remember 1 Nephi 17, Nephi's promise, if they had been righteous, they would not have been driven out of the land. Again, remember how Judges complicates things and helps you see it didn't seem to be the massacres like we saw in in Joshua, because there seemed to be so many Canaanites still all around. But one other thing to think about here, was there a right way versus a wrong way to pursue the conquest of Canaan? Even in terms of military ethics, there's something called just war theory. We studied it in DNC 98 and 101 last year. What does it mean to go back and redeem Zion? There's just war theory in terms of the conquest of Canaan in Joshua and Judges. And what's interesting about the Danites going off to kind of seek additional territory and to hire priestcraft to back them up, this is an example of doing it in the wrong way. And there's a different feel the way the conquest of this city is described versus what you saw in Jericho or Ai or these other kinds of places. Read it in chapter 18, verse 27 and 28. And they took the things which Micah had made, and the priest which he had, and came unto Laish, unto a people, here's the description, that were at quiet and secure. And they smote them with the edge of the sword and burnt the city with fire. And there was no deliverer, because it was far from Zidon. They were Zidonians living in that part of Canaan. And they had no business with any man. In other words, no leagues, no alliances, no one that could come to their rescue. This does not sound like some kind of rejoicing. The enemy was wicked and were driven out, and the land spewed them out because of their iniquity. No, this sounds like the Danites are in the wrong. These poor Zidonians, they were quiet, they were secure. And you came marching in with no mercy. No, there was no deliverer. There was no man to help them. This really does, the way this battle is described compared to the way the battles are described throughout Joshua and Judges is really different. And to me, there's just something here about do not mistake true justice for false vengeance. Something's wrong here. Don't mistake righteous indignation for mere anger and venting that anger on someone else. Don't mistake priesthood for priestcraft, certainly. And please don't mistake true religion for false religion. This is an unauthorized show of force. This is a battle that God does not sanction. And it comes across in the book of Judges with a different feel and a different description. Keep that in mind. Finally, verse 30 and 31, the children of Dan, they're in their new territory. Okay, now let's try to turn things in the right way, right? Nope, they didn't. The children of Dan set up the graven image, the fake thing that they'd stolen from Micah. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, the son of Manasseh, so again, not a Levite by any stretch of the imagination, he and his sons were priests to the tribe of Dan until the day of the captivity of the land. They set up Micah's graven image, which he made, all the time that the house of God was in Shiloh. The way the chapter ends there is so important. This whole time you've been doing this, the tabernacle is here in the lands of Israel. There are true Levites. You don't have to hire a Levite, let alone fake Ephraimites or fake Manasseites to become your false priests or false prophets. It's all falsehood. It's all fake. They draw near me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. And we are watching Israel apostatize before our eyes. It's a tragic downfall in the pride cycle, especially tragic when you realize the house of God is there in Shiloh. There are true prophets and priests and Levites, and we're going to see some of them very soon when we get to Samuel. Well, one last story, and this is a horrible one. So if you want to end the lesson now, you're more than welcome to. Although there are a few final minutes I think are worth tuning into. Judges 19, 20, and 21 is a story of a Levite's concubine. And it is a story of immorality. It's a story of rape. It's a story of violence and murder and retribution. It's a brutal story, but it teaches a powerful lesson on how wrong those things are and how right truth and virtue and justice and chastity are, and the price that must be paid to preserve those things. That's why I do think these chapters are worth studying. So stomach this. Let's get through it. Chapter 19, verse 1. It came to pass in those days when there was no king in Israel, same phrase again, that there was a certain Levite sojourning on the side of Mount Ephraim who took to him a concubine out of Bethlehem, Judah. Verse 2, his concubine played the whore against him and went away from him unto her father's house to Bethlehem, Judah, and was there 4 whole months. So playing the whore, here's this covenant infidelity. Verse 3, her husband arose and went after her, to speak friendly unto her, despite of what she'd done, to bring her again, in spite of her betrayal, having his servant with him and a couple of asses, and she brought him into her father's house. And when the father of the damsel saw him, he rejoiced to meet him. Now, this seems to be a good Levite and a good marriage. I mean, the father-in-law is all for it. And yet this woman has betrayed that trust and has played the harlot. Now, when she played the whore, we've seen that word before in terms of Israel went a-whoring after other gods. And we'll see it again in Jeremiah and Amos and elsewhere in Scripture, where, like I said, adultery becomes the symbol for idolatry. And either way, you are being unfaithful. Unfaithful to your spouse, like this woman was to her Levite husband, or unfaithful to the God that you are covenantally bound to, as in the case of Israel. So here this becomes a great metaphor if the Levite is the type of Christ and his wife, this who played the whore, is the type of Israel. We'll see this played out really clearly in the book of Hosea near the end of the year. But this is almost a preview of that same kind of lesson. Now, the Levite, I'll take you back. I'll forgive you if you'll just come home with me. And they stay there in the father's house. The father is wanting to protect them and preserve the marriage. He's all for it. He's all behind it. The Levite and his wife end up staying there with the father for several days. But then it's time to go home, and he's going to go home and bring his wife, his concubine, with him. On the way home, they've now left the father's house, and they're in this wicked world trying to navigate their way back to their own home. And unfortunately, what happens as they pass through the land inheritance of the tribe of Benjamin, they stop for the night in a town called Gibeah. And this is where the horrible things take place. First, the people of Gibeah show absolutely no hospitality. Remember with Abraham and the 3 holy servants, remember with Lot and the 3 holy men, hospitality was key. And one of the reasons that Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed, beyond sexual sin, which we'll see here, was also a lack of hospitality on their part, providing for people in need. Same thing's happening here. So this is Sodom and Gomorrah all over again. The fact that a city in Benjamin, in the house of Israel, had succumbed, lowered themselves to that level, are you kidding? Well, that's what's happened. No hospitality. Finally, there's an old man in town. He happens to be from the tribe of Ephraim. He's not even a Benjamite. And he's not from here, but he's in town working. And he sees this man and his wife and says, no one's letting you in? No room in the inn? Why don't you come and stay with me? And so finally, a fellow outsider, being kind to other outsiders. Then in verse 22, the men of the city, certain sons of Belial, which we would say like a son of perdition, just someone as bad as they get, they beset the house round about and beat at the door and spake to the master of the house, the old man, saying, bring forth the man that came into thine house, that we may know him. Now, here it becomes as obvious as it can get that we are channeling the story of Lot in Sodom. And here this city of Israel has become sunk to that level. And so threatening immorality, what happens? Well, again, like Lot, but unlike the Joseph Smith translation, in the JST of Genesis 19, remember this, Lot goes out and says, in the King James, Lot goes out and says, don't mess with the men, have my daughters and you can abuse them instead. That's horrible. The Joseph Smith translation corrects that. Lot was a better man than that. He was worth saving from Sodom. He says, don't touch the men, don't touch my daughters, leave everyone alone, do not do this wickedness. Well, it's an echo of that story, but without the JST providing a glimpse at someone's righteousness. Instead, this old Ephraimite that at least had the kindness to be hospitable to this Levite man goes and faces the wicked men of Gibeah that are threatening the Levite, and he says, no, take his concubine instead and do what you will with her. This is horrible. This is, again, a full objectification of women. Please don't think that this is a story about the way things are supposed to be. It isn't. It's a story about the way things get when people reject the King of Kings and do whatever they feel is right in their own eyes. It's what happens when you bottom out in the pride cycle. That's what these last few stories, or this last story in these final chapters is about. And so out goes the Levite concubine, and the men of Gibeah do unspeakable things to her. It's revolting as sexual violence and gang rape takes place until she is at the point of death by the time the next day dawns. They leave her for dead. And yet she crawls her way back to the door, just to the threshold of the house, and collapses there and dies. Her virtue has been taken. Her life has been taken. No, she was not perfect. She had played the harlot against her husband. But no one deserves to be victimized like that. Honestly, it leaves me sick to my stomach reading this chapter, thinking, has Israelite society really come to that? Has it collapsed to that level? In some ways, this is the equivalent of Moroni 9. The end of the Book of Mormon, when, yes, Nephite civilization is no longer civilized at all. You remember what Mormon says to his son in Moroni 9, verse 11 through 14? Oh, my beloved son, how can a people like this that are without civilization, and only a few years have passed away, and they were a civil and a delightsome people. Yeah, that's how fast the pride cycle can go. But, oh, my son, how can a people like this, whose delight is in so much abomination, how can we expect that God will stay his hand in judgment against us? Oh, yes, God is merciful, but God is just. And Mormon feared that justice. He knew it was coming. And Israel, prepare yourself for justice being meted out over the horrible injustice that has just been perpetrated in Gibeah. The Levite is horrified. He sees, as he's leaving the house, this concubine on the doorstep, thinks she's asleep, tries to rouse her, realizes she's dead, picks up her body, lays it upon his animal, and comes back home, and then does something that is equally revolting by modern standards. He takes the corpse of his concubine and cuts it into 12 pieces. Remember in Genesis 15 when Abraham cut these pieces of animal and separated them side by side to make the confines of covenant? Remember, cut is the word that's used for covenant. You cut a deal, you cut a covenant, we would say. Well, he takes this concubine, cuts her into 12 pieces, and then sends a piece to each tribe of Israel. So imagine being the leader of a tribe and you receive this message from a Levite you've never met, and in it is the most horrific offering you've ever seen. And in it is this explanation of what has happened within the kingdom of Israel. Among us, among God's so-called chosen people, have we really sunk to this level? He writes them this, verse 30, "It was so that all that saw it said, there was no such deed done nor seen from the day that the children of Israel came up out of the land of Egypt unto this day." I've never seen anything like this. This is absolutely horrific. And then this counsel: consider of it, take advice, and speak your minds. He is forcing Israel to see what they've become. And they're going to have to think about it. They're going to have to wrestle with this. They're going to have to figure it out together. Is there a solution here? What are we going to do to change our society once we have been fully awakened to the depravity that we have allowed to enter in? That's where Judges 20 comes in. Because what they decide to do, based on this horrific act that has taken place within their collective border, verse 1, then all the children of Israel went out, and the congregation was gathered together as one man, from Dan, northern edge, even to Beersheba, southern edge. Makes you wonder, what would it take to unite an entire people in our day? That is what happened on 9/11. As the entire American nation got behind an outrage that went beyond anything they'd ever imagined. That's what's happening here. What are you going to do about this? How long will your indignation last? What kind of sacrifices are you willing to make to right these wrongs? Because sadly, in some quarters, our post 9/11 zeal to turn to God didn't last that long. What's going to happen here? Well, 400,000 soldiers assemble. They're serious about this. They descend upon the people of Gibeah. In verse 8, all the people arose as one man, saying, we will not any of us go to his tent, neither will we any of us turn unto his house. In verse 11, so all the men of Israel were gathered against the city, knit together as one man. Talk about galvanizing the community, having all of society up in arms. I can't believe we have allowed things to deteriorate to the point that this is even possible, even thinkable. The tribes then tell the leaders of Benjamin, this happened in your tribe, in the city of Gibeah. You find the guilty parties and send them out so they can be punished with capital punishment for their capital crimes. Justice demands that. So send them out. But I don't know if this was misplaced mercy on their side or misplaced loyalty, perhaps. The leaders of the tribe of Benjamin say, no, we won't do that. These are Benjamites and we will back them up. This is a city in our territory. Go back to your own. We will not extradite them. That's going to prove tragic. Like I said, misplaced loyalties. They felt, I'm a Benjamite first and an Israelite second. Oh, no, you're not. Reverse that. It reminds me, sadly, of Robert E. Lee, who had the greatest potential to solve the Civil War militarily. And he was Abraham Lincoln's first choice for commanding general. But what did Lee say? It was a hard decision for him. But when all was said and done, he said, I'm a Virginian first and an American second. We cannot lean into lesser loyalties. President Nelson just taught that to all the young adults of the church. You have all kinds of identities. Make sure you keep the right ones first. Prioritize those ones. And the men of Benjamin put them in the wrong order and thought that a lesser loyalty should trump the ultimate, which was loyalty to the Lord. So what happens? A battle commences between 400,000 Israelite soldiers on the one hand and 26,700 men in the tribe of Benjamin. It was a smaller tribe, but they were a strong one. In fact, 700 out of those 26,700 were left-handed. We saw that with Ehud. There's a unique gift that's going to give them a leg up in the battle. And it says that they were so skilled when it came to the sling. We're going to see that later in the story of David and Goliath. But so skilled that they could sling stones at an hair breadth and not miss. Now, I don't care how skilled you are. Do you have any idea how outnumbered you are? You've ticked off the entire house of Israel. And to do what? To defend the indefensible? Do you have no conscience in terms of what has been done in your territory? Well, they decided to fight despite it. And ironically, they won the first round of the battle. and the second round of the battle. And it's like, wait a minute, they're in the wrong. What's going on here? And part of me, I think, is this God allowing Israel in its entirety to decide, how serious are you about righting these wrongs? What sacrifices of self will you make to truly defend righteous standards? I'm not going to make this an easy victory. You keep falling back into problems when things come easily. So, round one of the battle, 22,000 Israelites are killed. In verse 23, the children of Israel went up and wept before the Lord until even, and asked counsel of the Lord, saying, shall I go up again to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother? And the Lord said, go up against him. You see what else is on their mind? This is a fellow tribe of Israel. Do we really fight against them? This is a civil war within the house of Israel, and I know it's to defend virtue and chastity and right. Is it worth this? And God's answer was yes. Is it really worth taking on the Benjamites and having them suffer? Yes. Is it really worth, I hate to do the math here, God, but there was one victim of the Gibeonites. There's now been 22,000 victims among the people that are trying to avenge that loss. And God says, go forward. Okay, round two of the battle. We're surely going to win this time. No, they lost. And 18,000 Israelites are killed. The death toll among the righteous, well, more righteous, they've still got issues too, I'm sure, is now at 40,000. And again, they're rethinking, what are we doing here? 26 and 27. Then all the children of Israel and all the people went up and came unto the house of God and wept, and sat there before the Lord, and fasted that day until even, and offered burnt offerings and peace offerings before the Lord. And the children of Israel inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I yet again go out to battle against the children of Benjamin, my brother, or shall I cease? It's like, have we paid enough to show how serious we are? And the Lord said, no, not yet. Go up, for tomorrow I will deliver them into thine hand. Defending chastity, administering justice, doing right by a single innocent victim. Is it worth what you're paying? Yes. It's worth losses. It's worth setbacks to try to preserve the importance of covenant and virtue. I'm not saying we take up arms. We live in a different day. But I am saying we defend the family. I am saying we live the law of charity, but we defend the law of chastity. And that's what Israel is being asked to do. And they do it. Round three of the battle finally comes, and they finally win. In verse 35, the Lord smote Benjamin before Israel. And the children of Israel destroyed of the Benjamites that day 25,100 men. All these drew the sword. And then they burned the city of Gibeah to the ground. Oh, the burnt offering. That was the wickedness of Jericho, burned to the ground. Now the wickedness of their own city, Gibeah, burned to the ground as well. And 65,000 plus that died in the aftermath of an unspeakable deed that was trying to be excused or ignored when instead it had to be atoned for. The aftermath of the war is then where the book of Judges ends, in chapter 21. The other tribes swear that I will never allow any of our daughters to marry a man of Benjamin. Now, I can see where they're coming from, but there's still this sense of Benjamin's our brother. They've just lost 25,000 men. I don't know how many women and children have been casualties of war, but now no other daughters can marry into the tribe of Benjamin. What are we going to do about the future of Benjamin? That is a tribe of Israel. That is our brother. And now they start questioning that. What do we do for them? I am grateful that they're at least thinking of, they've atoned for Benjamin's past. Now they're trying to provide for Benjamin's future. In verse 2, the people came to the house of God. Again, a great place to go and seek divine direction. They abode there till even before God, and lifted up their voices and wept sore, and said, O Lord God of Israel, why is this come to pass in Israel, that there should be today one tribe lacking in Israel? I mean, they knew justice had to be administered, but they also regretted that such consequences had to come. And how do we make things better moving forward? How can we really rehabilitate people who have justly been punished, but hopefully now are ready to move forward? Now, this is what they decide to do, and I don't agree with all of it, and you don't have to either. But verse 6, the children of Israel repented them for Benjamin their brother, and said, there is one tribe cut off from Israel this day. How shall we do for wives for them that remain, seeing we have sworn by the Lord that we will not give them of our daughters to wives? When it says that it repented them, it's just, again, a matter of pity and sorrow. We knew we had to do it. Justice had to be administered. I'm just sad it had to go that way. And that's actually good justice. Again, when you're motivated by righteous indignation instead of mere anger. When you're not venting your frustration. When it really does hurt me as much as it hurts you. Well, regretting that they had to punish the guilty, but trying to figure out how do we help replenish the population of Benjamin when we already promised we'd never let our daughters marry their sons. Well, what do? The rest of the chapter describes the ways that they ensured the survivability, the perpetuation of the tribe of Benjamin. We can't let them disappear from the tribes, and so what are we going to do? And this is the part I don't agree with, and you don't have to either. First one, we're going to do this. There was a city that wouldn't join Israel in the battle against the Benjamites. This is kind of Curse of Meroz 2.0, and it was a curse. You didn't come when called upon. Did you not care about the covenant? Are you not willing to defend what is right? Because that makes you party to the problem. That puts you on their side, and we fought and destroyed them. And so as punishment, we are going to fight and destroy you. And they do. They destroy that other city in Israel, except for all of the women that have never been married. Then they take those women and bring them to the Benjamites and say, now you can have wives to marry from this group. I didn't say I like this. I didn't say I agree. I think they have a good goal, but how do we reach that? They've foreclosed some better possibilities already. Maybe that was a rash vow on their part. And now they're trying to fix things as best they can, kind of cobbling together some kind of solution. The other one is perhaps even worse. They suggest that, every year at the feasts, people will come up to Shiloh, and maybe on the way, if you see any women that are kind of off on their own, they describe them as people that are kind of dancing and rejoicing over these yearly festivals, then how's this for a solution? Verse 20 and 21. Go and lie in wait in the vineyards and see and behold if the daughters of Shiloh come out to dance in dances. Then come ye out of the vineyards and catch you every man his wife of the daughters of Shiloh and go to the land of Benjamin. Now, that's horrible. That sounds a lot like the wicked priests of King Noah when they abandoned their own families and then they're hiding out in the wilderness. And when they see the daughters of the Lamanites out dancing, they go and kidnap them and take them wives to themselves. It actually makes me wonder if that was the only thing that the wicked priests of Noah remembered from their brass plates scripture study. Like, oh, that's how the Benjamites did it. Maybe that's how we can do it too. I think that's wrong on both occasions. But remember, this is not God commanding them to do that. You don't have to justify what you see at the end of Judges. In fact, I have a feeling that it's meant to work on our heart and give us that gut punch so that it tells us this is not to be justified. That there were things going on at the end of the book of Judges when things had gotten down to a point in the absence of prophets In the absence of righteous judges, there's none during this time. When society has devolved to a level of such depravity that both problems and even solutions all seem wrong. And my biggest fear is that where we're allowing society to go in our day? Or are we willing to stand up? Are we willing to try to reverse the pride cycle? To turn to God in our moments of destruction and really repent and then hold to the covenant so that our prosperity never need fall back into depravity. You see the way it all ends? Look at verse 25. In those days, there was no king in Israel. It's the fourth time that's been said in this book. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. We've seen that several times too. If nothing else, allow the book of Judges to be a cautionary tale of the dangers of moral relativism. The dangers of the pride cycle, again, but also the dangers of just forgetting God and going on to do whatever you think is right in your own eyes. We need better eyes than that. We need an all-seeing one that will lift us up to become more like him. Micah's and Michael's in the real way. I'll close with this, going back to our star story, which is Samson. And if he's the best personification of the book of Judges, if he's the best personification of Israel in terms of its potential, but then sadly in terms of its actual and the distance between them, one word that kept coming up, I didn't point this out because I wanted to save it, but if you go through the story of Samson, Judges 14, 15, 16, whenever it talks about directions that Samson is going, guess what word comes up most often? The word down. In 14:1, Samson went down to Timnath. 14:5, then went Samson down. 14:7, and he went down. 14:19, he went down to Ashkelon. 15:8, he went down. 16:21, the Philistines brought him down to Gaza. And finally, after his death, 16:31, then his brethren and all the house of his father came down and took him and brought him up and buried him. The story of Samson seemed to be one unending descent into a lower level of living, far beneath his privileges, far below his lofty potential. And we cannot allow that to happen. A great statement from President Gordon B. Hinckley. One of the great tragedies we witness almost daily is the tragedy of men of high aim and low achievement. Sound like Samson? Sound like Israel during this period? President Hinckley said, their motives are noble, their proclaimed ambition is praiseworthy, their capacity is great, but their discipline is weak. They succumb to indolence. Appetite robs them of will. And that to me is the cautionary tale of the book of Judges. That to me is the book of Judges' call to repentance for each of us, a call to humility and maintaining that humility. I'll end where I began. As I've sat here for the last few hours, or you as you've hopefully broken this up and made it through this week of scripture study, is your head spinning? Are you reeling from their lack of repentance? Are you a little frustrated with Israel's repeated succumbing to sin and falling into pride? And perhaps, are you a little frustrated with God and his ever-present willingness to give them second chances? Well, hold to the first frustration, but not to the second. And allow the Spirit to say to you, as it did to me, anytime you wonder why God keeps giving people additional chances, it's because he does the same for us. For that, I am eternally grateful. I am grateful for a God that does not sicken of second chances. or third, or fourths, or 50ths, as often as my people repent. I will forgive them, he tells us in the book of Mosiah. What's the important phrase there? Yes, as often, but what else? My people. God is trying to make of us his people, a chosen people, a peculiar people, one that he can claim as his own. To do so, may we fully claim him as ours. I testify that as we do so, as we come unto him and hold on to him, then he will make us holy, and he can keep us holy. That is the promise he makes for all of us, if we'll just come unto him.